Hate. To many people, I think that would be an accurate description of a lot of concepts and storylines in the X-Men. Magneto hates mutant oppression, we all hate X-Men Green, and of course, by far the most important, is the hate humanity on a whole feels for the mutants in the world of the X-Men. However, what if I were to tell you that there is a much different emotion that would much better describe the X-Men universe and would solve a few weird plot hole type situations and put a new angle on the entire X-Men lore because it would turn everything you know about the X-Men on its head. Hello, welcome to my video on the X-Men. Now, my history of the X-Men is kind of odd in some ways. I like the X-Men. I enjoy most of it. Most of my understanding in many ways, though, comes from the GameCube game, or at least for years it did. And I'm not the biggest X-Men fan in the world. I can't name every character or all the backstories, but I enjoy them for what they're worth. However, something that's always bugged me about them was how they're oppressed in the world, in the Marvel Universe, because on average, it makes absolutely zero sense. Like, a few other people have kind of pointed this out, but it just doesn't add up properly. The biggest and glariest thing that to everyone is kind of obvious is, why are the X-Men not okay, but the Avengers and other superheroes are? How come people are not okay with Cyclops, but people are okay with Captain America? It just doesn't make sense. Now, logically, there are ways to explain around this, but it never came off as satisfactory to me. It just came off trying to slap a band-aid on a completely cut-off limb. And yes, I know the whole explanations even the comics have given for these kind of things, but once again, they never felt right to me. So I was thinking about this myself. Another angle about the X-Men, the whole discrimination that never added up to me, is how closely it's supposed to mirror werewolf discrimination, though obviously not exact. It never made sense to me because, well, let's be honest here, there isn't a big difference between most groups of people, if even really one at all. But I think we can all agree on some fundamental level that the difference between two people's skin color is not even remotely comparable to the guy who can shoot lasers out of his eyes. I mean, I know people have said they can't think me through, but it does feel like a weird disconnect. It works on a very surface level, but when trying to use it on a deeper level for stories, it just doesn't add up. It just feels wrong. Why are people responding in such a weird way? So overall, none of this makes sense. It's a bit weird. And also because I think it kind of boils down to being generic. Despite the X-Men being powerful, being strange, and having these interesting world building, it just feels like an excuse to tell any kind of story about people being mistrusted by society. And it just never felt right. And don't worry, this isn't going to be one of those stories where I explain how Magneto was secretly the good guy, because he isn't. Magneto is a villain in literally just about every continuity, and that's not a question. But, now here's the thing. What if I told you that there was a much better explanation for why people hate the X-Men, hate the mutants, and why, on some level, if this interpretation was true, it would make perfect sense and allow for more original storytelling. Now, I will be the first one to admit, this would be next door to impossible to implement in the main Marvel Universe without some weird retconning. It would just be too weird. Might work for like a new cartoon or a new comic universe or something, but I do fully admit that though the basic concept of the X-Men this works out great, if you tried to implement it in, say, the 616 universe, it would fall apart just because it wouldn't add up perfectly due to the hundreds of issues that kind of do it. But my reason is that, like I said in the intro, the X-Men discrimination is often based around hate. But I think there's a much better explanation for it. Envy. Yes, I'm going to argue that the reason humanity hates the mutants, the reason they hate them with a fiery passion and want to see them destroyed or enslaved, or just gone or whatever, is because of jealousy. Now, this has occasionally been hinted at a few moments of like, oh, they're homo superior, but I don't think it's as complex as the grand struggle for humanity or the possibility of humanity's future. No, I think it is simple envy and jealousy that causes almost, if not all, of the mutant hate. Or at least logically it would add up. Now, this might sound weird, but it makes sense. Because I want you to look at yourself. I want you to look at modern society. Now, this might get a touch political, but hopefully not, so just bear with me. Is that how often do you see people being racist to each other? It's not that common. People might argue about this or that, But fundamentally, we live in a pretty decent time when it comes to racism and discrimination. In fact, even nowadays, most people, or at least sensible people, will say to you that we might not be perfect, we're far from it, but we do live in one of the most equal ages in mankind's history. Or at least if you live in, like, America or the West. I can't say the same for other places, but generally speaking, if you live in the places where the X-Men stories generally take place, you live in one of the most free, egalitarian times in human history, despite its flaws. Which is saying a lot about human history, but that's neither here nor there. But what is something you probably see on a daily basis? What is something that it's more or less socially acceptable for people to do, even if you're a good person? Well, that's envy and jealousy. Now, obviously, people have always had a desire for what other people have, and that's just human desire. That's not even necessarily a bad thing, because wanting something can motivate you to do good things, or even just be dedicated to get what you want. However, there are certainly people who will get jealous and mad and angry at people just because they have what they want. It's not necessarily even a logical response, it's just hate. Or more specifically, envy and jealousy that leads to hate. Perfect example I'm talking about here is how many people hate people who are rich or have great health or just have a skill or just have something that you don't. How often as a kid or as a young adult did you hate someone? Did you get envious for someone because they had a console or a game that you didn't? How often did you get mad at someone because they had a fancier car than you or they had a better job than you? Now, all of those things pale in comparison to having superpowers. Because let's be honest here, yes, some mutants really got the raw end of the deal. Some of them got some really bad mutations, and some have some things that are more minor than actually useful. But generally speaking, that just happens with life. Some people just have horrible birth defects or horrible injuries, so that's not really adding anything new to the human experience in a weird way if you think about it like that. And fundamentally, the mutants can do things that humans just can't. Humans can't regenerate like the Wolverine. We can't shoot lasers out of our eyes like Cyclops. And yes, I know they're not technically lasers, but who cares? You can't absorb the powers of people like Rogue. You can't turn into people like Mystique. You can't do a lot of things. You can't be a telepath like, say, Professor X or Phoenix. You can't control magnetism like Magneto. You can't do all of these things that these people do casually. And it gets even worse when you realize they were born with it. This wasn't dedication or a freak accident. They were just going to have it and you weren't. And that is hard for people to deal with. Imagine living in that world, need I remind you. Imagine living in a world where some people are just blessed with great, incredible powers, and there ain't nothing you can do to stop it. You are just stuck as a normal human in a world of superhumans, where just because of a random roll of the genetic dice, they're stronger, faster, smarter, and more attractive than you could probably ever be. And you're just stuck. There's nothing you can do. There's no situation or thing you can do. You are just worse off than they are. No amount of money, training, or dedication will get you to their point. And that is a lot to take in for someone. Because just think of how jealous someone might get of someone who just is healthier than them or just has a better metabolism. Because some people are just healthier than others naturally. And that alone can spark jealousy. Just look at, people who get mad at celebrities who are healthy or something, that people get mad at them, or the money they have. And they're still humans, by all accounts. They don't have powers or abilities. And fame is a relatively fickle thing. But all that, hate, gossip, and such around it is enough on its own. And that is saying a lot. A lot, really. And then, I think this is compounded by the age at which mutants often get their powers. Now, it's very important detail that X-Men mutants can get their powers at any age. It can happen to you when you're a baby, it can happen to you when you're an old man. It does have some variability. However, it often shows up during puberty, around the teenage years, give or take. This alone sets up the psychological precedent. This is at a very formative age in a human's identity, where we as people are often searching for ourselves, where we on some level are less connected to the direct family and starting to become more connected to society. You start becoming more aware of the social climate because you aren't just a child, but you're also not an adult. So, Imagine living in a world where at any day, just because just think about it, at any day, any random day, you could literally become a superhero. Now, granted, logically speaking, that's kind of ridiculous in a world like Marvel that could happen to anyone, but just by a random world that has no action of your own, you could become someone with great and incredible powers that no normal human will ever be able to match. That would set up a very strong precedent, a sense of expectation. Even if you know the chances are slim, people still go out and buy lottery tickets, so if the chances are even vaguely similar to winning a lottery, you know what I mean, then people will expect that they will be the one. And what happens when you aren't? When you aren't chosen, because most people aren't. Statistically, even in the most generous versions of how common mutants are, they aren't everybody. You know what I mean? They are the minority, a rare population. So most people who expect to become mutants are going to be disappointed. They're going to be disappointed, and what are they going to have to do? It's not just that that they have powers and you don't now. It's that you wanted something, you expected something, you believe you deserve something, and you didn't get it. That alone could cause all kinds of feelings of jealousy, and jealousy can lead to envy, and envy can lead to hate. So you might hate on them. You might actively oppose them just because you are jealous that they have what you don't. And that alone can drive a human to do awful, horrible things. Just look at how people will fight over gold, a random metal that basically only has worth significantly because we give it so. Most of gold's worth is literally just because most human groups have decided that gold is valuable. And it's precious, and it is worth something merely because it is gold. Now, imagine you have something like superpowers, which definitely don't have a subjective value. They have an actual, physical, tangible effect. Now, and then, this leads to another issue. What happens to the people who do get powers? Think about it. That might easily create a sense of superiority. Because you were one of the chosen to become better than most people could ever dream. That could easily lead to entire groups like Magneto's group, who are dedicated on mutant supremacy, because in a weird way they're partially right. Because, now granted, most people will argue that it's more a matter of the soul, and I would agree that too, but if we're talking on a biological level, a lot of mutants would absolutely kick everyone's butt, mine, yours included. It's not really a question. So that could easily lead to a ton of mutant supremacists, forcing groups like the X-Men into a weird position. It's not just society hates them, and the mutants are and the Brotherhood are evil who lash out just because, well, they do have some reason, but it's now turned to a weird situation where humanity both idolizes and is super jealous of the mutants. It creates a situation, and that alone, I think, is a more interesting thing to tell a story because it adds an element that is unique to the mutants rather than just being a hodgepodge of different historical forms of disintegration. It's its own thing, a weird mix between hatred and idolization. And that alone, I think, would be an interesting way to tell future X-Men stories, because I think it's more realistic. Because in our society, I will make the argument that stuff like envy and jealousy are more common, and perhaps it's more common and more widespread than hate in a lot of cases. Like, there are a lot of people who will get mad at you just because you succeeded at something and they didn't. Now imagine it's something as big as superpowers. That alone sets up a whole new precedent, and I personally believe that future X-Men universes should delve into this concept, as I both believe it's more realistic and has more room for interesting storytelling. But yeah, that's my video on the true reason why the X-Men were fumigated. If you want to see more videos like this, or more videos, or just whatever you want to see in the future, then just stay tuned, and I'll keep working on stuff. And from the green grasses of Earth to the greatest stars beyond, you're welcome. Yeah. Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscriber. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.